Hello and welcome to another episode of OxPod, conversations with students at the University of Oxford. Today, we're speaking with Amy, and we cover a broad range of topics. She studies English languages and literature, and not only that, she participates in quite a few extracurricular activities, the Oxford Union, student journalism, and previously dance. We talked about issues like class division and renewable resources. We talked about her own background in ballet and what it means to attend a prestigious university. We talked about Amy and her endeavors to help disadvantaged students through the mentoring program that she engaged in. Got on issues in the US and the English language course that she does and how she feels about it, how the syllabus could be altered. Quite a few other topics. So I think you'll enjoy this episode. Stay tuned. Start there. All right. So welcome back, everyone, to another episode of OxPod, Conversations with Students at the University of Oxford. And today we have Amy as our guest. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, I'm Amy Ellis Winter. I'm a second year English student at Christchurch and I'm very excited to be here on this podcast.
Fantastic. And if I understand correctly, beyond your degree in English languages and literature, you also participate in a lot of extracurricular stuff here at Oxford. What do you do?
Yeah, so probably too many to count really, but I work in the Oxford Union, as you know, and I'm pretty involved with that Oxford Girl. I used to be involved with the Oxford Blue, a really cool student newspaper, a little bit involved in the Drama and Film Society here and there. So yeah, those are pretty much my main things at the moment.
Amazing. Okay, so how do you find all the time to balance these things?
Don't sleep.
Don't sleep, that's the secret?
No, I guess I'm not great at time management. So I really try to stick to my schedule and be like, okay, I have an hour for union work, an hour for writing, whatever it is, and fit my degree in between.
How much are your professors watching right now? How many hours?
Can we cut those away?
We just cut that out, it's fine.
No, so it is very hard to balance things, and I definitely have struggled at times. But I think the rewards have kind of outweighed the consequences. There haven't been major consequences yet. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
It's been very rewarding, I think, and I don't really have any regrets about the amount of participated in.
Outstanding. And so, why English?
I feel like the simple answer is it was just what I was good at.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I was a child, 3, 4, I was a really big reader. My favourite book was The Hobbit. I used to read Pride and Prejudice all the time. I'd get my mum to read it to me. And I just grew up surrounded by books. I didn't even really get my first smartphone until I was in high school. So I was...
That helps. That helps with the reading. If you don't have
definitely helps with the reading. And I just really love literature. And I kind of actually, especially with A-level, I started to dislike it. And I think it's just for me personally, I know it kind of defeats the point of academic work, but I don't really like being told what to read type thing. I like to kind of explore it myself, and I find that I read a lot more widely when I am given that freedom. And so I definitely there's sometimes when I don't really enjoy my degree at the moment. I'm actually really enjoying it this time, just because I like the modules we're doing. We're doing William Blake and Wordsworth, and I really like their poetry. But I often find I never find time to read for pleasure at the moment. And so I do have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with my degree, because I don't like to do things for the sake of doing them. I want to do things because I'm passionate about them and I have a genuine interest. So yeah, my degree, it kind of varies a little bit. But ultimately it was what I enjoyed most at school.
And so then, was there a reason that you went for Oxford in particular? Was it always if you went back to your 12-year-old self and said, you're going to Oxford, you're doing this, beyond, what would be the reaction? Did you think this was going to happen?
Yeah, so I don't know how happy my family will be about me saying this, but so there's a 10-year age gap between me and my sibling, and they went to Oxford as well. They did English at St. Cat's, and it was always this kind of, because there was such a big age gap between us, when I was younger, so like 8, 9, people would say to me, oh, do you want to be like your sibling? Like, you're going to go to Oxford too, type thing. And at first, when I was little, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm going to go. You know, we'd visit my sibling a lot, and I just loved it here. It's very different to North Wales, and I prefer it here, even like the architecture itself. It's just like, I really like the environment that Oxford has. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Oxford type thing. And then the older I got and the kind of more it was said, I sort of grew a bit of resentment, because it was a kind of like, I always felt, I think a lot of younger siblings will have the same issue, like a kind of comparison point a lot. And then I started being like, no, I'm not going to go to Oxford, because everyone, if I apply, everyone will think it's because I want to be like someone else. And my sibling did really well at Oxford, but I don't want to follow in the footsteps of someone else. That isn't something that really appeals to me. And so for a long time, I was like, no, I don't really want to go. And for years, I kind of like backward between a sort of, okay, part of me does want to go, but I don't know if this is because of like, I've been like told I'm going to go. And I just really struggled. It was like, I didn't know what my actual opinion was anymore. And then ended up deciding like, yeah, like Oxford is the one for me. And it was actually more a financial decision, because I'm a Crank Start scholar and I'm from like a very low income background.
So just briefly, we should explain for those that aren't studying at Oxford what a Crank Start scholarship is.
So Crank Start is a really great scholarship that Oxford offers if your parents or your household income is below £5,000 a year. Funny story about this actually. In my first year here, I told a PPE student at Christchurch that I was a Crank Start scholar, and he was like, oh, you know, like, what does that entail? And I said, oh, well, it's below £5,000, and he was like, that's impossible. Like, no one earns below £5,000. You can't live on below £5,000.
Really?
Like, yeah, that's the point. You can't.
They were making a joke, or was it?
No, serious.
Interesting.
Kat's telling me, I think you've got the numbers wrong.
So did he drop economics, or what was the position on, like, I'm sure there's got to be just like, look, that's less of an entitlement thing and more of like, look up the spreadsheet.
No, constantly insisted I must have got the numbers wrong. I even showed him the website and he was like, you're reading it wrong. It was only when another guy that I was friends with was like, no, mate, she's right, that he was like, okay, my bad.
It's wild.
First taste of misogyny.
Now, I always found there's a big contrast between here and Russia in many senses, and obviously I left before the war started, so daily interactions might have changed, maybe not. But even though that country came out of a revolution in 1917 that was based around very explicitly this whole idea of destroying class differences and so on, there still are differences in class, and people talk about them, but not in the same way as here in the UK. And it's weird that a country, UK did have a revolution way back when with Cromwell and so on. But even though there's been social unrest, it didn't tear the country apart and rebuild it from scratch in the same way that happened in Russia. And I find it a bit weird coming here, even though I'm fluent in English, my exposure to English culture is very recent, that it's a big thing here. The class divide is huge. And I find it hard when I listen to these sorts of stories to tell between, is it somebody that's over exaggerating a difference between like somebody who's from a lower class, upper class and backwards? Or is this legitimate? And initially I thought that this was people just flinging stereotypes at each other. They're like, surely these sorts of people only exist in the imaginations of people who like oppose them or aren't them. But then now that you told this to me, I'm like, oh, no. At this point, I'm like, that could have happened. And it's sort of weird. It seems, I don't want to be on a high horse because there's a lot of things in Russia that are doing substantially worse than they are in the United Kingdom in terms of at least like political and economic stability. Like, you don't have to pick a side to say that people feel that they can make long-term plans in the UK better than they can in Russia. That's a big thing, and I think people here don't appreciate that as much, that people can be like, in 3 years, I'll do X. Whereas in Russia, a lot of people don't feel that way, regardless of whether or not they agree. But the one thing that is not necessarily worse, but more extreme in the UK, is that class divide. Even though I don't know the economic data, but I would be willing to say that the distribution of income is perhaps a bit better. Ross, can we look that up? Jamie, pull that up. maybe we need to work on that. We need to have a data set. But we'll just go by the data set of anecdote. That like really the class divide in terms of psychologically is stronger here.
No, definitely. I think that was one of the things that sort of had me torn between coming to Oxford or not, because actually, so when I applied to Oxford, I didn't want to kind of get it in my head I was actually going to get in. I said, right, I'm going to go to Durham or Exeter Uni because they both offered me places. And I said, that's where I'm going. Oxford, I've just applied. It's a bit of a pipe dream, but like, I was making plans for Durham, I was making plans for Exeter, whichever one I was going to decide on, or York. But then when I did get that offer from Oxford, my initial reaction was to reject it.
Interesting.
Because I was like, no, this wasn't factored in. This wasn't supposed to happen.
Oh, wow.
And I genuinely had a moment of where I've got to say no. Like, they've made a mistake, or I hadn't planned for this. This was not like a possibility. I had not factored this into the equation. And the financial help, and also Christchurch is actually a really good college to go to financially if you're from like a low income background, because they offer you 50% of food and accommodation, and that just helps out like massively. And so ultimately, like, it was actually the financial aspect, which is a bit sad really, because I'd like to say that, oh yeah, the thing driving me to go to Oxford was sort of like my like academic desire. And yeah, I did want to do well academically, but it was also about helping myself out, helping my family out, and financially, like, this was the best decision for me. And what surprised me about this is when I arrived, I was kind of expecting the sort of class divide to be a lot more visible, and it wasn't. I settled into Christchurch so easily. It felt like home. It really did.
Okay.
Like first year. And that really surprised me, because a lot of people put the stereotype in Christchurch as being, like the really right-wing, Etonian, like classist type one. And that wasn't my experience. And I made a lot of friends with private schoolers here, and they're all very lovely people. And class was never kind of on my mind. And I was like, maybe it really has changed. And then over the year, I kind of felt, actually, it is still there. It's just more subtle. It's like these little things, like people kind of not believing that anyone could possibly earn under 5,000 a year and survive. And it's like a lot of people are earning under 5,000 a year and making like really struggling to make ends meet. And it's sort of those little kind of ignorant things embedded in just sort of, no one in particular, but kind of Oxford culture as a whole. And I've got a lot of friends who are from private schools and actually kind of reject the whole private school system because they don't think it should exist in the way it does. And I don't want to abolish private schools. I want to bring up state schools to meet the same level, where it's like state schools are as good as private schools and everyone kind of has that equal opportunity. Because although Oxford is trying to like close that gap further, there shouldn't be a gap to have to close. Everyone should instantly have the exact same opportunity. And I think that actually ties in why I do so many societies as well. I had an interview with Ox Student, a student newspaper, the other day, and it's called, I think it's coming out tomorrow, it's called like Behind the BNOCers. It's a very cringy.
For those that don't know, as I didn't know, BNOC stands for Big Name on Campus.
Yeah, it's kind of this thing that Oxford does. It's like, I really don't like the idea. Cherwell, another student newspaper, often releases this list every year called a BNOC column, and they basically just like put who they think like the biggest names in the university on there. It's always a very specific group of people, and I don't actually think that the idea of a BNOC exists. I think it always happens to be people who join certain societies, and it's not the people that are like big names themselves, it's the fact that the societies are already on a platform, whether it's student drama or the union or student journalism. These platforms are automatically in the public eye because of how much they do. And so it's just by joining them that you're instantly like a little bit more seen. I reject the concept of a
But you went to the interview, didn't you?
I went to the Oxford.
Alright, just for full disclosure here.
What you can read in the interview is just 50% of me being like, but I'm not a BNOC, like you do realise.
Interesting.
That. I happen to have an interest in societies that tend to be more in the spotlight. And that isn't because I like being in the spotlight. If anything, my biggest fear is actually being perceived. So I don't know why I agree.
Being perceived, just like sort of not being perceived as, just being perceived in the general.
You could have the best opinion of me in the world, and I won't like the fact you have an opinion of me.
Why?
It's just like I don't know. I don't like the fact that other people think.
Do you just the fact that that's now it's not within your control, that somebody's just like sort of they've decided that you're good or bad or you're X or Y, and that exists, it influences you, but it's not, you can't sort of turn the dial on that. It's they turn that dial, but it's about you.
Yeah, and I don't like to be put into like that box if you are one thing. I don't think, I think some people are morally good and morally bad. This is just turned into like a philosophical conversation.
No. Yeah.
But I don't like the idea of it's kind of like you are known or you are not known. But also with BNOCs, like the whole thing about the BNOC thing is you've heard about them through someone else, you don't actually know them. And I think that's the other issue I have. I'd much rather someone formed a judgment of me based on meeting me rather than reading a column or an article or something. So that's like the main issue I have with the whole BNOC thing. But what I was going back to tangent, the one thing that I said in the column was, I think coming from a state school background, we didn't even have a student newspaper. It was a really poor state school in an incredibly deprived area of North Wales. There were stabbings at local schools, like it wasn't very safe. And I come from a single parent family, and we didn't have much money, and my mum did like an amazing job to, keep us safe and everything. But it's, you don't have a say over the school you go to. And she would say to me sometimes like, oh, I wish I'd been able to send you to a grammar school or something. But I don't think I would have wanted that, because the experiences I have are the experiences I have. And we didn't have a student newspaper. My main passion when I was at school was dance. And I was dancing for about 12, 13 years. I got onto a summer school at Rambert School of Ballet and Contemporary, a French ballet school in London, when I was 16. And that for me was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be my thing. I'm not going to go to uni. I'm going to go to a dance school. I'm going to focus on that. And I got to perform in like operas as a dancer, and it was just really, really cool. And that was my thing. And I was fully invested in dance because that was the only thing in the area that really sort of like was something I was passionate about. And coming to uni, I did dance for a while, took classes, but it sort of faded into a background, which is a bit of a shame. And it was like, there were so many new shiny things that I'd never experienced before. I'd never given a public speech in my life, let alone a debate. And it was like, there was so much to take on, and I only had 3 years to do it. I sort of threw myself into everything. And I think it's not private schools in particular, but private schools in general, they have these opportunities. They have debating societies. They have student newspapers. To them, it's not something new. They can take on society because it's a bit of fun, because they have some free time. And I said this in the column, I don't think state schoolers perceive it in the same way. We have to launch ourselves into these societies because we're making up for so much more lost time, and we're not going to have the sort of extracurricular, the opportunities, the networking opportunities that we've had in the past. And state scholars might be like, oh, like a student newspaper, cool, a debating society, cool. When we're like, oh my god, I've never like even been allowed to have an article published before. And it's a very big shift, and I definitely took on like a lot more than I should have, and it burnt me out mentally quite a lot in the first year. But I just felt I didn't want to like waste my 3 years, and I felt like I had to make up for like 18 years of having some nice opportunities, but not quite to the same networking extent that Oxford offers. And honestly, you can get a really good degree from Oxford and it'll be fine, but I think majority of it is like networking, because you're like talking and making friends with people who are probably going to be in Parliament one day. And it is a very sort of networking based university, which is a shame.
I think it's signal theory. I forget the authors behind it, but if memory serves me correctly, I'll just say that it's right, and if I'm wrong, I'll just double down on it. That's the way to do it. In international relations, there's this notion that it's not about the actions of a government, it's about what that action represents. But that also scales down to, for instance, the job market, and how a degree doesn't actually, the grades and so on don't actually represent that, I don't know, a score of 80% on your calculus tests represents that you have a proficiency in calculus. It's a little bit of that, especially in STEM, but more generally, the fact that you've got Oxford on the label indicates, as a proxy, as a shorthand heuristic, that you probably are hardworking. And so if you're a company that has infinite time, you're obviously going to do your due diligence and look at every single grade. But if you're a company that feels like spending an additional $10,000 on making more stringent recruiting strategies, or implementing them, if you don't want to do that, you want to save money, you can just go through the minimum effort judgment that gives you, most of the benefit. And then, because it would be very expensive to get that extra 5%, you can always fire someone. So then the heuristic is also signal theory. It's not what your degree is, it's what your institution and your degree signals. That it can be inferred that above random chance, or above 50% likelihood, that if you went to Harvard Med School, you're probably more likely to be good at medicine than someone who went to a less reputable university. And that's a problem. But also, I think it's true that we do rely on these signals. And whether or not companies should or should not is a different question altogether. But it's true. And I think that it's somewhat, I've said this before in a previous episode, it's true that coming to Oxford is about really going deep into your subject, and it's very academically challenging and it's very rewarding. But there is a signal theory component to it. But I think that somewhat reassuringly, there are other things which can also be used as these signals, whether it's graduating at the top of your class, or being in an extracurricular activity, or having a background that sort of separates you from the group because you had some sort of unlikely experience. There's a lot of signals, but one of them is definitely the title of your university. And I sort of came up against that when I was applying for a second undergraduate degree, because I'd done my first one in Russia. And many universities, somewhat understandably, in the United Kingdom and in the US, had a special list of a few countries where they basically said, in more polite terms, your high school diploma is worthless, and you really need to prove to us with additional certification that whatever you did in university wasn't fake. And that includes Cuba, Kyrgyzstan, I think Russia, and a few others, either Soviet bloc or maybe a few in the Middle East. Basically, cheating happens more often in those countries. Supposedly, although I think there's a case to be made that maybe cheating happens in the West and it's just underreported. Regardless, there was definitely a moment when I felt that I got a first in my degree, but one of the reasons that I came to Oxford was because in the UK you can apply for up to, I think, 5 degrees on UCAS. And and I knew that I wanted to do either psychology or neuroscience. I applied to a master's at St. Andrews, a bachelor's at St. Andrews, a bachelor's at UCL, and a bachelor's at King's College, and then a bachelor's at Oxford. And the first 4 said no. And Oxford was the last to respond. So I was out in Australia, it was the pandemic. My parents insisted that I leave Russia because they felt that things were unsafe. Turned out they were kind of right. And I felt like, and then it really did feel like a bit of it was a bit of a knock. Not so much on the confidence. I felt a little bit indignant because I could understand where they were coming from in a sense, and I'll never know because it didn't help that I was a 22-year-old applying for a second undergrad, but even the master's, I thought the master's would be the safe option, even though I was like, I want to get a broader understanding. I didn't really feel like the fact that it was from the Russian Federation that was working against me, that it must be suspect. If I had gotten the same if I had gotten a first from an institution that might even have a lower academic ranking overall, but from a Western country, then this wouldn't be an issue. But that might be wrong. There's lots of there's an interesting experiment I heard about where they the participants had these scars painted on their forehead. Are you familiar with this? They had sort of facial blemish or deformity or whatever painted on with a face painter, quite realistic. And then they were asked to sit an interview, a job interview. And then afterwards, they were asked to rate various factors. And one of them was, to what degree do you think that this face paint thing affected the likelihood of you getting in. But what half of the participants
I
didn't
assume it
know,
wasn't like a massive gaping wound.
something like that, like
Really?
a big like liver spot or some sort of thing.
You know, like if someone's forehead was like sliced open.
No, not that.
I'd be like,
more like
go to the hospital first.
no, like an axe, just Halloween costume.
I'd be like, no, I'm fine.
More like some sort of, I don't know what like a birthmark or sort of these cosmetic, genetic, whatever they are.
Yeah, I was gonna say the way you were painting it, I was a little bit like, to what extent is it?
No. But they did that. But then half the participants didn't know is that at some point they had the scar covertly removed with a tissue. And yet they completely confidently said that it was clearly because of that they had been not considered for the job. And so the takeaway, the interpretation of the researchers being, and I wish I remembered the citation, that if you if a person believes that they're likely to be a victim, even if they're not being victimized for a characteristic such as a facial or like some blemish or deformity or whatever the thing is, they'll still attribute salience to that. And why wouldn't they? Because that's sort of, you'd probably be on high guard for that. So I think about that sometimes. There's no value will come out of ruminating on it now, but I'll never know. And I have to like counteract that bias to think that it's if I think that coming from Russian university would work against me, I'll be tempted to fall into that. It might have been something completely different.
Fall into the Australian.
Or because I was that was really what did it. Anyway, coming back to that. So now you're doing English. You're doing all of these extracurricular activities. What's on the horizon for you? What's your next project that you're excited about?
Gosh, I think I'm more in a state of like I should be dropping projects really, because like I said, I'm actually really enjoying my degree at the moment.
Okay.
And it's often very hit or miss with me if I enjoy it, but I'm really like kind of modules, and I almost wish I just like had less projects so I'd have more time for my degree right now. But so on top of the column coming out tomorrow, Oxford uni students, the Instagram account, they reached out to me and they've asked me if I'll do a takeover for them for third week. So I'll be like filming every bit of my life and then uploading it, which for a person who doesn't like being perceived isn't great. But I am looking forward to that. I think that's my next project. And then the week after, I'm doing a big social media takeover for That Oxford Girl, because I'm the current editor-in-chief. And so we have a big international platform, a lot of students who want to read our blogs, find out about life at Oxford. So I've agreed to do a takeover for them. So a lot of kind of social media work, I think. And I'm also in charge of the union social media and making graphics. So I'm in a very toxic relationship with Canva Pro right now.
Oh yeah? In what way?
In the sense of it's me in a club at 3 a.m. or in a bar, and I get a text from someone on the union being like, I need you to make this, and this, and I'll be on Canva doing artwork and stuff. Oh. I don't want to do it. But yeah.
Interesting.
But no, I found it pretty fun. I did art at school, exams, and I wasn't that bad at it, and haven't really had time to do it. Coming to uni, there's not really much time for anything, and I think this has actually just been really good because for those of you who aren't at Oxford, I used to be what we call a hack, and that is
used to be.
Used to be. I have been reformed. But no, I used to essentially...
Go on.
I used to essentially run in student elections for the Debating Society of the Oxford Union, and then made it onto kind of the governing body, and then decided to take a step back. Hacking is it's a bit dehumanising. This kind of I don't like the idea of my relationships with my friends are just my personal relationships. I don't want to use them for benefit to get a vote or something. And I think that kind of comes hand in hand with hacking. And it got to the point where I was I really just don't like this concept. And I decided to go for an unappointed position instead. So no hacking from me ever again, thankfully. But it's been quite nice because I've managed to stay out of all of the politics, all of the kind of messier side of the union, I guess.
We should mention that also the Oxford Union is not only for debating, but they also are a bit of student politics society in
Yeah.
a sense. They're 200 years old this year, and so for many students, if I've got this right, it's not just about the debating, but it's about inviting famous speakers, like former US presidents or senators, and sort of being a part of that. And so I think for some it's about having fun. For some it's because they want to pursue a degree in politics, or they want to pursue a career in politics. And the debating chamber is a one-to-one replica of the debating of the House of Commons.
Yeah.
It's kind of on the nose there.
Yeah. And one of our former presidents was like Boris Johnson and stuff. So I think for some people who take the political route, the hacker route into the union, it's very much a kind of a replica of a career in politics. That was never for me. I think when I first joined the union, I was pretty naive and didn't really know much about it. I ran an election because a friend wanted me to. That was kind of the limit that it was there for. And I have no current interest in a career in politics, and I don't intend to kind of go higher up in the union, but beyond doing the artwork and the graphic design right now. And that's just something fun. That's just something I like to do. And I've been more interested in maybe pursuing a career in branding or marketing, because I have some experience in fashion as well. But yeah, it's I think for the people who do want to use the union for that, it's a very kind of it's a very accurate platform to do so. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's definitely one that's going to get you to where you want to be, or help you out on some level, even just by the kind of people you invite. I've met people that I never thought I would meet. And last term, when we had a different president, and I wasn't even director of communications at the time, I didn't do the artwork. The president just messaged me because I'd expressed an interest in maybe doing graphics, and said, hey, I need you to design the union's first honorary membership certificate. And I was like, oh my God, this is a really big deal. And he was like, yeah, can you get it for me tomorrow? I was like, okay, I'll do my best. And a lot of overthinking. And I made the first kind of template for one that's going to be used in the future, which was a fantastic opportunity, really. And I helped present it to Bernie Sanders and Sir John Major.
Was Bernie that?
Bernie.
Damn.
Gave it to Bernie. And a funny story about this, actually. So when we were framing it, the president at the time had put his finger and he bled on the certificate.
It's a bit of an omen there. What's going on?
We couldn't get a new one in on time, and he told Bernie it was a printer ink stain. He was like, "Oh, we just had a printing issue," and I was like, "That is your blood."
We're back, folks. People will always find some controversy. I think that's a problem if we just assume that everybody's talking about current events in good faith. That's not the case. And I think that going by that assumption is also not very effective unless it's with friends. With friends, you give people the benefit of the doubt when they're raising an issue. But I think that you should be giving the disadvantage of the doubt when it comes to an opinion, to some sort of discussion where everyone can anonymously contribute their thoughts. Because you can say, okay, so statistically, the likelihood that maybe one person is going to come at this psychopathically, and maybe they're just adding their thoughts just to upset people, not even because they think this, but just to upset people. It doesn't matter that it's statistically unlikely, because that one opinion is enough to change the dynamic of the whole thing. I don't know. So I say this to mean that any current event that has at least 40 people who don't know each other, there's going to be controversy, regardless of whether or not it warrants that controversy. Okay. There's always going to be at least one person who wants to make it controversial. And so it's inevitable in a case, which doesn't mean we should be desensitized to it, but just that we have to always wonder, is this real? And that's hard, because then if you're talking, usually these big discussions happen not between 40 friends, but in a larger audience. How are we able to split between this is a serious matter that people should maybe change their opinions on so that everybody suffers less, versus somebody's getting a kick out of the fact that we're all fighting each other?
Okay, statistically, that's correct in the fact that if you have a large group of people, there's going to be one person there's going to be a lot of people that have different opinions, because opinions are individual to everyone. But I think if you're going to have a room full of people who perhaps in not the union. I think the union, there's a lot of different opinions. But if you're gonna have, I don't know, a student newspaper or something, just like the unions, like the point of the union is to have different opinions. But if you're gonna have some other society, Taylor Swift society thing.
Okay.
Taylor
Swift
Society.
Sock.
Now, yes, Swift Sock. Now, I'm very good friends with the treasurer of Swift Sock.
Shout out to them.
They're doing a fantastic job. Hi, Bella. But Swift Sock, for example, uncontroversial, not problematic. Everyone in Swift Sock is going to have the same opinion. They love Taylor Swift. And that's going to be 40, 80, 100 people. And they're all going to have the same opinion. Now, their opinions are going to differ on which of her songs they prefer or like the most, or what album is the best. But they're all going to have the shared opinion because that's why they're there. And so I think the only like flaw in that is if you bring together a random group of people, there's going to be different opinions. They're going to be controversial opinions.
That's a good point.
But it also depends like what group those people join, because some you're just not going to have any disagreements at all. You're not going to have someone joining Taylor Swift Society who doesn't like Taylor Swift.
Yeah, there's a shared, otherwise why would you be there? But then it gets weird if it's like, for instance, with university or even at the level of a country, when with the circumstance of a country, most people can't pick and choose and say, I don't like this place, I'll move somewhere else. So they're there, and there's no minimum requirement for, it's not like Swift Sock. It's not a voluntary, like, I'll be here because I share X value. And then with university, you might come in because for the academic component. But when it comes to student life, it might be predominantly liberal or conservative, and you might disagree with that. But because the academic supersedes that, you sort of, not necessarily involuntarily, but it's not the same as with Swift Sock, where it's the whole reason that you're there is because you share this axiom.
And I think that's just kind of like, you can't make the assumption that if you bring together a group of people, they're necessarily going to have a different opinion. Like, it's the same as maybe going to a protest. You're going to have a counter protest probably to whatever you're protesting. There's always going to be someone who disagrees with what you're saying. But everyone who's like deciding to go to the protest, they probably all have the same opinion on whatever they're protesting.
Yeah, on that one thing. And then as soon as they're on the drive back home, carpooling, and they're like, so what about X? And like, oh man, come on, you need to get out of the car now.
Yeah.
It's weird. But I mean, it's good in a sense that there is that variety. But obviously it can also be troublesome because you can get into more, or you can bite off more than you can chew, in a sense. Sometimes just saying what you think. And I don't think that sort of feeds into some tirade about like these woke times or these super conservative times. It doesn't go either way, but just saying something might lead to implications that you never saw coming.
Yeah.
Not because you had bad intentions, but because you're doing your degree and then something comes up, you're chatting on a podcast, for instance, and then you have a hot take and then somebody comes in. So on that note. Okay, so English. You said that you prefer the notion that you can sort of choose what you want to study. Is there ever a part of like the first year, for instance, where you didn't like studying it in the moment, but now that you've done it, you're glad that you were sort of forced to do it? Is there anything like that?
No, that sounds so bad. It sounds so bad, like regrets. But this is the thing, right? I didn't actually like the Oxford English course that much, in the sense of when I was reading through like the website, it wasn't appealing to me. It wasn't really jumping out at me. And Exeter actually was the English course I preferred the most, and that was because it was the most versatile. You could literally like shape it however you wanted. And I think, okay, so I did Old English in first year, and there was a lot of Beowulf from The Wanderer and The Dream of the Rood, and it was almost like taking just a whole foreign languages paper, because so much of, basically half of the exam was like just pure translation, with closed book and everything, obviously. And I really struggled with it at the time, and part of me was like, I did not sign up to do a languages degree. And I'm glad I did it in the sense of, like, I think it's important that these things are preserved, but the fact I was forced to do it, and it wasn't optional, and like I was told, you know, how to approach it, really like took away the sort of funness of learning a new language for me. And I kind of had an advantage in the sense that I did GCSE German, and Old English had like Germanic, which is pretty much English does as well. But it sounds like Welsh, and I'm Welsh, so I had like the perks, like the best bits. But I just struggled with it a lot. It wasn't something that came naturally to me, and I wish that I'd kind of been able to have a different approach to it maybe, and treat it more like a language class rather than we're not going to properly learn the language, you're just going to be expected to pick it up and then talk about it in a literary sense. So yeah, I mean, I don't have regrets. I think it's important to keep things alive, but it's the same way I didn't enjoy learning Welsh at school, and now I'm quite glad I did, to be honest. It is sort of like people only really learn Welsh in Wales now because they have to do it. It's like a core part of the curriculum, and I think, I mean, you need to keep the language alive. I do believe that, but I think in terms of education system on the whole, I think a lot of it is actually taught in a way that doesn't appeal to people. It's not even taught in a way that kind of works for everyone. Like, I have pretty bad ADHD, and I would really struggle to kind of like focus on what I was told to do. But if I was allowed to sort of like take a topic and run with it, I was so much more knowledgeable. And it's a hard balance. Like in my degree, for example, I am so prepared and so on the ball in classes that I really enjoy and topics that I really like, I'm passionate about. And then if they set reading that I'm not actually that interested in, I'll do it and I'll get the essay in, but I just I don't feel able to talk about it as much, or that my opinions are going to be valued enough because I'm not actually passionate about this topic. And so it's difficult because I'm not saying like everyone should be able to pick whatever they want to study, because I think people do need like a grounded education in everything, like all of the basics and stuff. But I do just wish there was a little bit more leeway, I guess.
Do you feel like the degree to which you can make yourself be passionate about something, has that ever changed? Do you feel like you can do that less, more, or has it never been a thing? Are you able to, because I find that sometimes I've had subjects in my degree where I've really, really struggled. And a piece of advice I heard was to sort of try to, you can either like the process, the outcome, or the topic. And so if, for instance, the topic itself isn't appealing, you might focus on the process of memorizing flashcards and how it's sort of a game. And then if not that, then you can think, well, someday I'll be doing X career and this will then come in handy, or this will set me apart. Sometimes I succeed in using that strategy, sometimes not so much. I feel like, honestly, this is the first part in the psychology degree. The last 4 terms are all electives. So first you do the stuff that the British Psychological Society mandates, and then once you do that, then the rest of the degree is what you want to do, because now you've got the core stuff. And I feel like some of my decisions, it was a 50-50 split between that which appeals to me most and that which I think most people will struggle with, and that not necessarily is not boring, but is so rigorous that my assumption is that most people will avoid it. And I found myself weirdly attracted to that, partially because in personality theory, I'm high in openness, or so I would say. You can't really tell, you can't measure yourself. But I would assume that I'm high in openness. And that sort of ties into being a contrarian in a sense of, if everybody's going right, I'm going to go left. And I sort of, for better or for worse, it's very annoying to many people, but I know that's I feel tugged in that direction. But I often wonder if that's even a sort of healthy strategy, that I picked this particular topic, and I'm hoping that I can get through it. Sometimes it makes sense, but it can be brutal. And I know, and it's very different to the rest of psychology. And there's about 5 people in the class, and in the past paper, sometimes 3 people take it. But my thought process has been, this isn't just me. This isn't a what's your favorite color. It's harder and it's very dry. And I'm banking on the fact that there's no person on the planet that was just born loving this. And so when I graduate and I'm applying for a job, I can be the guy that says, actually, I know this. And I'll be the only person on the applicants list that went through the pain of it. But then sometimes I turn around and I think, am I just making life harder for myself? Because maybe there is a guy or gal who really does love it. And then they'll probably outpace me. Because not only are they doing this weird thing, but they're also, but they also like it. and that sort of crosses my mind a lot. I mean, the topics are locked in now, and I did a sort of even split. But yeah, I think because I mean, you look at finance. There are a few people who love finance, but I think a lot of them, because I did econ, they do it because they want to earn money, and they would like to. And some of them are coming from low income backgrounds, and they know that money can change a lot of things. It doesn't. What is it? There's that Kanye line. Careful, but I mean, before he recorded this, before his career died in that tragic anti-Semitism accident. He has. Where is it? Money isn't everything. Ross, the producer, knows this one. Okay.
Money isn't everything. Not having it is.
There we go. So I think that there's so many factors that in an ideal world, maybe it would be what we like is what we study. I think it's foolish to pretend like that isn't important. It's foolish to pretend that students can just sit down and like, this is my job and students should study hard. And actually this makes me fall asleep, but I like it. Like it's true that sometimes it's such a slog, but I don't know but then there's these other motives of, for instance, finance, but also that this masochistic idea of I'm the only person that can handle this. That's accountants out there. I love you, accountants. You're beautiful. You're wonderful. But even in the world of econ, it's the one that everybody runs away from because it's just so. There's a few people who will tell you that they love it. I'm not convinced. I think that within the finance bro is the accountant.
Okay.
And because everybody drops out of it, CEOs will often either pay massive money to an accountant or try to learn it themselves because they know that if you don't know accounting, whoever does has you by the balls, financially speaking. In financial terms, they have you by the balls. Well, in the sense that they can see how money is moving around in a way that you can't. And so if there's any form of fraud that could just destroy your company, you look at the spread, you look at the cash flow statement, and you can't tell. You just can't see. I might be over exaggerating it here, but I'm right, and come on the podcast if you disagree. But there's just, you can enable an Excel function that shows you the connections between accounting sheets. It's just, there's like 100 arrows. If you've got it down to an intuition, that's great. And then there's that conflict of it's so painfully boring. But if you know it, it's like a superpower. So it's like, do you spend your whole uni life being miserable in the hopes that when you graduate, you're a superstar, only to then discover that maybe you're not. Maybe you just made life harder for yourself. Or do you follow the thing that you love, knowing that there are some topics that maybe you disagree, that there are certain topics that more people love than others. Like for instance, in psychology, many more people enjoy social psychology and clinical psychology than, for instance, psychophysics. When and I don't think social psychology is necessarily easier once you get into it, but people think it is. And so more people sort of go for it initially. This is a big question, but it's a hard split. I guess I'll boil it down to, do you ever wonder about the temptation to push through something that you hate?
Okay.
Do you think it should be encouraged, or do you think it should be discouraged?
Hate is a strong word. I mean, I'll go back. There's nothing I hate about my degree. There's bits that I struggle to wrap my head around and bits I don't especially like. But this is the thing. I think the thing I dislike about English, specifically at Oxford, it might be quite different at the uni because I know the tutorial system is pretty unique to Oxbridge. But you come here, and this goes back to the private school, the state school thing. We are expected to know how to write an essay, not just an essay, but an essay that Oxford will approve of. And we are not given the mark scheme, and we are not shown examples of these essays. The private school kids, they can focus specifically on the topics, and they can get a lot more out of it, because they have been taught how to write these essays. They've been bred to it. They've literally spent years writing the essays that Oxbridge look for. And it's definitely, there was one person in my entire cohort at Christchurch who got a first in English. I think that tells you something about the degree in the whole, and I'm pretty sure there's more private schoolers in my English class than there are state schoolers. And it's evident that in classes especially, I have things I want to say and things when I feel very passionately about the topic, and I don't have the words or the means of which to say them. And the majority of my stress when it comes to essay writing It's not I don't know enough about the topic. It's I don't know how to present myself in a way that people will want to listen to me. And I've spoken to my tutors one-to-one about this, and they always say to me, you know, like, your grades would be a lot higher if, like, you wrote your essays, like, about how kind of passionately you speak about things in class. And it's like, I understand that, I know the content, I just don't know how to put that across in a way that people will want to listen to me. And I think that the private schools do know that, and they get a lot more out of their degree because they don't need to worry about how to write an essay or how, like, pretentious I need to sound, or how academic I need to sound, or intelligent I need to sound. They know that already, and they just need to write about the topic. Whereas if you come from a background that hasn't taught you that, you're literally trying to figure out how to write an essay. And I used to say to my tutors, I just don't think I'm going to get it. And they'd be like, you'll get it by prelims, you'll get it by the end of the year. I got like a good solid 2-1 at prelims, and I still don't think I'm like cracked.
Which is like, I guess, for those listening, that's like a B+ essentially. Would you say that, or an A-?
A first is like an A star, a 2-1 is like a A.
But A star is like for.
Oh, that's also a British system.
Yeah, so it goes. So first is sort of, it goes upper first, or just first 2-1, 2-2, third pass, fail.
No, anything below a third at Oxford is a fail.
Really?
I think a third is
I thought
a third at the end of your degree is a fail. A third at the end of your degree is a third. A third in prelims is a fail.
Oh, okay, I see.
You have to get a 2-2 to pass.
You have to get a 2-2 to pass.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But, okay, so it's out of 100, and a first is 70, a 2-1 is 60, a 2-2 is 50. That's how it works. And it's ridiculously hard to get a first in English. Like, the highest, one of my friends is so good at English, and the highest grade she's ever got is a 77. She's not achieved above that. Whereas my boyfriend, he's a finalist at the moment. He's doing chemistry. And the other day he was like, oh, I did shit in my collections. And I was like, no, I'm sure you didn't. You know, like, what grade did you get? And he went, I only got an 86 on one of them. I was like, Jesus Christ. Like,
wow.
And
it's still, and the threshold is the same. It's still a 70.
Still the same. But that's the beauty about STEM, right? And that's the issue I have with English. STEM, it's right or wrong. English, you're just praying that your tutor agrees with you and likes the range that you've written. I submitted an essay the other day that turns out I had a high 2-1/first on, and my tutor said, like, one word I used, the word was reveal. He said it was Jarman. And I was like, bro, it's just a word. And he was literally like, this is really Jarman, and I think other readers would feel the same. You should use the word discover in the future. And it's like, oh my god, that's like one person's opinion. With all due respect to him, like,
I'm going to keep this for my next tutorial. For those, it's usually either one professor with 1 to 3 students, and next time I get feedback, I'm just gonna say, well, this is just one person's opinion.
This is just one person.
This is, I mean, really, if we haven't actually, this is, I wouldn't call this peer review, and we're supposed to. This is incomplete. I think the data is biased here, or the data are biased.
But it's like, in chemistry, they don't care if you use the word reveal or not. They just care if you get the right answer. And I think that it's just so hard because English is literally just about people pleasing.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you could. That kind of connects to the age-old debate of, is there such a thing as objective beauty? Are there things which are where even if it's hard to determine, there isn't a beautyometer. It has to be sort of inferred from subjective feelings, but then you as a critic or you as a tutor or a student, you just have to place faith in the fact that whatever your subjective feeling is will be generalizable. And it is to a degree, because I can tell you that yesterday I was angry and I don't have to explain to you what that means. I don't have to, so my face felt a little bit hot and I was like sweaty and I had this arousal.
My camera's overheating.
Your camera's overheating?
Yeah. This
content is just too spicy. And we're back. Let's roll it back. So, how or
how I feel about private school is.
It was.
Oh my god, this is literally just me like talking about private school for like an hour and a half. No, it's just that whole notion of like, my tutor called me Jarman.
There we go. Oh, the objective beauty. Well, and how I'm not sure if we were rolling then. But the point being that it is there's an extra step when it comes to English. I presume. Tell me if I'm wrong here. That you have to trust your gut in a sense. That you think that it's good, and you have to have that confidence of well, if I think it's good, they probably think it's good
when
too.
you haven't been brought up in an environment like I studied school, well, my teachers there were lovely people, but they don't have that kind of like overwhelming, you're right, you can voice your opinions. Because you're in a class of 30, and the majority of the teachers' attention is just spent on trying to get like the naughty kids to behave. And so the ones who actually want to be there are often sort of brushed aside because they're behaving and stuff, but they're not really being pushed further. And I was never taught like it's okay to voice your opinions or to have confidence in your argument. And the entire like principle of having an English essay is you're arguing your opinion. And whether it's right or wrong, there isn't really a right or wrong. You've just got to present it in a convincing way.
Yeah, I still struggle with that as well. And I think with schooling it is tough to get right because if you have there have been many things that have been tried over the years. I think there was the 11 plus exam, which is, if I remember correctly, is broadly considered to be a failure of psychology. That the researchers behind it thought it would be for the best. For context, for those that don't know, essentially the notion was that it is known that there's a strong genetic component to IQ and that predicts many aspects of academic performance. And so the idea was that if we can screen for IQ at an age when any differences in household income have not yet really sunken in, like at the age when accuracy is highest, we have these 11 plus, the UK used to have these 11 plus exams. If you scored high enough, you would go to schools where more money was devoted to fostering that academic potential. And if you scored below an arbitrary threshold, then the money would be, in theory, put into supporting a student who would otherwise be disadvantaged. And that it would be for the best because those that needed more support would go to a school that's focused on supporting, bringing you to, I guess, whatever was considered to be the baseline. That you were below baseline and that they'd push you up there. And anybody who had the potential to go far above would be pushed that way. What ended up happening, as far as I know, and I'm sure that this is very contentious, so my opinion's 100% factual, is that all of the people that scored well on the 11 plus went to schools that got a lot of money because obviously it was a thing of value that from a market/economic perspective, if you're smarter or if you score higher on IQ, then you're more likely to get a higher income and therefore you're more likely to donate money back to the school that you graduated from. And so if somebody looks at you not as a parent, not as a friend, but as a fellow member of the market, then they'll say, you're more valuable to me. And then all the kids who scored below, it was, well, that's great for you, but the likelihood that you're going to that I'm going to make a return on investment, an ROI, is lower. And so they got neglected financially because people thought, and I think, and part of that, even if you want to be a cruel economist about it and not bring in the human factor, I think you can still make a case even within that limited space and say, well, it might be that bringing somebody to baseline, even though the reasoning is faulty, but bringing them to baseline produces a greater economic benefit on average than taking the few outliers and pushing them further. Or maybe do both. But I think that it's now been retracted. But I think Romania also has a similar system where the government has decided that they have enough money to like supercharge about 3 or 4 schools for the whole country. And so at a certain cutoff period, all the kids take this test and you can kind of prepare for it, you kind of can't. There's a big question of
we have something like that here called the 11 plus.
Oh, so that's still a thing?
It's sort of similar and you get into like grammar schools with it. The only reason we didn't have the opportunity, you don't have grammar schools in Wales. They're not a thing.
Oh, so the 11 plus is still a thing in the UK?
In England, I'm pretty sure
it's still going?
Well, one of my younger cousins took it and she passed and she got into a grammar school and so did her brother.
Interesting.
So yeah, the 11 plus is still a thing. But Wales, very low funds, different government to England, no grammar schools, only private schools that are mostly down in the south and majority state schools.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that opportunity isn't in Wales.
But it's
still in England. Unless it's been removed and I'm just a bit slow.
No,
I think it is still a thing.
And because firstly, there's an axiom in there that we've got enough money to charge 3 schools, but not all of them. So we should get the people who would get the most out of it. And I could agree with that if, for instance, it was the case that you could have a high quality of life without that you don't, and I think it's almost an infinite debate, precisely because you don't, before you're born, you don't get to pull a slider, as far as we know. You don't get to pull a slider of your height, your IQ, your eye color, your skin pigment, all of these things. And so, they're an eternal debate, because you can have a differing opinion, but you can't just turn the dial. And so it's very upsetting. But then I think there's a push to just say that IQ doesn't matter, that it's fake. And as far as I know, there is quite strong research that it's real. You can even see it in response time. That's how there's a whole theory that it's the efficiency of your nervous system, that it's about this conductance speed, or that you actually see less activation in an fMRI in the brain compared to a person with lower IQ when they're solving a problem, which is about the efficient brain hypothesis, that they expend less energy on the same task. That seems to be, it's likely to be real. However, it's a different case altogether that let's move away from the world of it's uncomfortable, so let's pretend it's fake. Let's go the other route. It's real. What do we do with there's just as many people who score at the very top as there are at the bottom. It's a normal distribution. And I think that's a big uncomfortable question that no one wants to, and there might not be time today. We could come back and talk about it again. But then if there's people who have such a low efficiency in the nervous system, whatever we want to call it, that they struggle to even do volunteering work, they have the same inherent worth from the perspective of the legal system and religious. They have the same value. They're still a human being. But I don't see anybody it feels like it's an elephant in the room societally, especially in industrialized societies where learning these skills really differentiates you. So we just sort of don't talk about it. We're just like, we'll sort it out. It's kind of a bit like homelessness, although that's also a very multifactorial issue where we don't really know what to do about it. We know that there's a substantial portion of people that are in this situation of low IQ, but it makes us very uncomfortable. And so therefore we'll just either pretend that they don't exist or not really address them. And the problem is that there aren't many people that are at that distribution in Oxford. Researchers who are supposed to be finding the insights that they then give to politicians so that politicians can hopefully make an informed choice as they skim read the suggestion. That doesn't happen because the researchers never interact with anybody that's even at mean level IQ. That's just there. And so they have a very distorted impression of, and it's not like you can go out, like with the homeless or, for instance, people that live in non-industrialized societies. You can just go there. They all live in a very, in a place. You can go out and seek a shelter of many homeless people who might live in a small community. But I think that with low IQ individuals, they might be sorted into certain trades or certain aspects of the labor market. But more often than not, people who have a stable profession aren't in that group. It's the people who are so low on the distribution that they can't even land a job. So where do you find them? How do you have, and they're going to have an issue with articulating themselves depending on the severity. So how do we, and I subscribe to the notion, not because it makes me comfortable, but I think it's really true, that these people have just as much value to offer to society, but we haven't figured out how. In the same, and it would be cool if we talked about it, but the first step to talking about it is to admit that there is a distribution of, that has, I think it's a 50% variance in academic output, which still leaves a huge gap. There's the other 50% that's like, what is that? Could that be discipline, willpower, upbringing, personal decisions, passion, interest, anything? But there's the other component, and that's big. It's not everything, but it's big. And we don't know the solution.
I think it's acknowledged to some extent. I mean, the 93% club exists. And for those of you who don't know what it is, in the UK, 7% of students in education are at private schools, and 93% of students are in state schools. And the 93% club is set up more so in places like Oxford, where there's an overwhelming number of private school students to try and make this state school student feel more at home, essentially. So I think there is some level of acknowledgement in the disparity there, but it just isn't acted upon, definitely enough. And I feel quite strongly about the topic as well. And last year I started becoming a mentor for a platform called Zero Gravity, which is like a mentoring, Oxbridge admission mentoring system, where it offers services to the free and it's volunteering work. It takes like Oxbridge students and they become mentors for kids who want to be helped into Oxbridge and all come from low-income minority state school backgrounds. And it was very like empowering. And over the summer, I worked with 6 kids, 60 hours of just like pure volunteering. And at the end of them, four of them kept in touch with me and told me they'd actually been accepted.
Oh, hey!
Like in Cambridge.
Amazing.
Pretty fucking cool. And I felt like a huge sense of like reward from it. And it was a very big achievement and I felt incredibly proud. And I could only wish that sort of I had a similar mentoring system. And some of them, on some days I would set them, like past papers and I'd mark them, or I'd go through their personal statement with them, or I'd give them mock interviews. And some days they just sit there and I'd just talk to them about life here. Because as much as they may be intelligent, you also want to feel a part of it and you also need the confidence to apply, because you could be the brightest person in the world, but if you went to a state school and you haven't been convinced that you're worthy enough to be here or even worthy enough to apply or sit the interview, you're just not going to apply. And so my job kind of really like varied between literally just like encouraging people and building up their self-esteem and then like actually like doing the admissions work and stuff. And I still work for them now and it's like a very, very rewarding opportunity. And I found the same thing with that Oxford girl, because every year we take first years who are women from minority backgrounds or low economic backgrounds, and we make them ambassadors and we give them all of these networking opportunities, whether it's like brand deals and connections with John Lewis or the Ivy. We've like, when I was an ambassador before I became editor-in-chief, I'd never even like dreamt of having any of these kind of like networking skills. But it's just like, it is good that there are societies that like recognise this and organise this. But then like, that's done for the students. What about like people like grown adults who don't have those opportunities anymore and aren't in university or can't afford to go to university? And I'm very, very grateful in the fact that Oxford has helped out in that financial aspect. But some people are like past the point of university and they're not able to get back and go. And it's really heartbreaking, and not enough is like the schemes are being put in place now to help the kind of upcoming generations. But people who are already homeless at the moment, they don't have that same level of access and support. And I think that like unis are doing a good job of, I mean, it's not the uni's responsibility technically, like that unis are doing a good job of like helping students get those schemes, but the government needs to be doing the same equivalent of helping like people who are out on the streets get into those schemes. Because it's just like you said earlier, the people who turned up to the interview, with cuts on their faces or a birthmark or a bruise and stuff, have a lower chance and felt like it affected them more. It's going to work the same way. There's going to be a bias in everything. And the government just aren't doing enough to like help that.
Yeah, I always wonder whether or not it would be because the argument that comes on the other end is that the government's inefficient and people should do it themselves. And then you say, well, people don't have the resources. I would be interested I heard somebody talking about how they're hoping to crowdfund a film about the pharmaceutical industry. And the reason they're doing it that way, even though they're this top doctors so they could get money easily, is because they want to make sure that people can't accuse them of having a bias. Because if they receive money from the NHS, for instance, or from a company, I always would be interested to see if you could campaign to say, if we manage to, like on Kickstarter where you don't have the money yet, but you pledge it, if the government gives you the money back, if people prove that they could, if people say, we're going to pledge this much money to an initiative that people, like you said, the Oxford girl, you said, okay, the government isn't doing this, I'm going to do it. People have come together and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it. And then if you prove that, wouldn't it be interesting if I feel like then people on both ends of the political spectrum, in a sense, would be happy. Because if it isn't being done, the government should do it. But if people pledge the money, they haven't spent it yet, all of that money should be reimbursed from their taxes, because they're basically taking upon themselves to do the job of the government more efficiently.
I think in the case
this is again political. I mean, I could be. This is an idea. I have a position, but my position changes from day to day. So
I think in the case of that Oxford girl, we are definitely, that is kind of people helping people. In that sense, if we are doing a job to help each other out and we're all benefiting from it, but we're getting something from it. But each of those ambassadors has basic food, shelter, water, warmth, and education. We cannot fund that. We cannot give that to them. That's the government who needs to fund that. From the basics, people can help people grow. But if you don't have the funds to support yourself, well, barely to support yourself, you still can't hardworkingly afford to give that to another person. That needs to come from a higher body. I don't like the government, just to put it out there. I'm not,
And in this government, you're allowed to say that, and I like that. We should always be dissatisfied. We should always want something better.
I think being Prime Minister must be one of the hardest jobs in the world. And I think it is a hellish job, and there's always going to be people that disagree with you. However, in my opinion, certain decisions can be made. Certain funds, just for the sake of having good morals, that can be better invested in like the NHS and not in oil companies. And
But there's a problem there, because that keeps... I have to chime in then. No, sorry, you want to say your part?
Are you going to defend oil companies?
No, there's a dilemma here that I'm familiar with. My knowledge of the moral dilemma here is part of the reason that oil companies... I might be shilling oil here. I don't know if this is fake. I'm going to be the person in the 1920s saying tobacco calms your throat. But the argument I've heard, because I'm with you, but then the what is it? The rub is that if the government doesn't subsidize oil, then fuel costs go up and then grocery prices go up. And so it affects lower socioeconomic people in the first instance, because upper class people don't care if their meal deal becomes twice as expensive.
But fuel costs are already going up because fuel is becoming increasingly scarce. It's going to go up anyway because we're running out of those resources. If you just turned around and the government will say, oh, we invest in oil companies because they bring us like the most profit right now when maybe renewables don't. And in turn, that gives us like more money for the country. But it doesn't. They just reinvest that money into oil companies again.
Yeah, investments.
And it just becomes this complete circle. And eventually you're going to run out and you won't have invested enough into renewables. You won't have invested enough into kind of giving people basic housing. This is the other thing. Landlords. I could go into an entire podcast about how much I dislike landlords. I don't think that people should be able to have a second home until everyone has one good quality first home. That is my personal belief. And I feel very strongly about that because landlords, it's just like, it's a mass exploitation. There needs to be so many more legal rules put on them. And they just aren't. They're able to get away with so much, and it's just exploiting people. And the worst landlords are often those that kind of have the like shitty housing to deal with in the first place, and they take advantage of the fact that these people can't quite afford it, and it's disgusting. And the government just focuses on the wrong things, and it needs to be completely reformed. I do believe in having a governing body because I think it is important. We need someone to kind of like look after the country in a sense and decide on those laws, and that should be done by a public vote. But right now, it's like the focus is completely wrong. And like coming back to that Oxford Girls thing, people can help people can give each other more opportunities, but it's difficult if you don't have the actual financial funds in the first place, which should come from the richest governing body. Like, it's difficult to do anything. You can volunteer at a food bank, which I've done before, and it's a great thing to do. But I physically don't have enough money to support myself and buy all of the food. I can help make it, but I can't buy the amount of food that is needed because I won't be able to support myself as well. And that's what the government needs to be doing. We can help people, but the government needs to put the money into the right places in the first place. And it's the same with that Oxford girl. Like, all of the ambassadors, we give them networking opportunities, but to start with, they're in Oxford University, they have an education, they have housing, a clean shelter, food, water, warmth, and we're like a non-profit organisation. We wouldn't be able to give that to them as much as we wanted to. That needs to come from someone else. And it's just that kind of sense of we just putting things into the right. It's like the whole like privatise the NHS thing. Like the NHS is like, we've already seen something happen in America, and I know there was Obamacare. That like I guess that was a sort of American equivalent, but it didn't do the same job as the NHS, and the waiting lists go on for years and years here. And firstly, it's amazing that we just have an NHS, but it's slowly crumbling away. And like hot take, probably going to go on Oxford. The coronation, for example. Millions and millions invested into it. Meanwhile, we clap for that NHS. Like, come on. That money is better spent elsewhere. Like, the royal family aren't going to have people to tax if people aren't well enough.
Do you think you would feel the same way if you had
Why is it coming to an end and I'm only now getting into it?
If you had gone to a public school, do you think, all other things being equal, if you had gone to public school, every biograph, I know many other things would change, but for the purpose of the thought experiment, everything about you is the same, except you went to a public school. Do you think you'd have the same opinion?
Okay, I don't know me personally. I do have friends who went to private schools and they share the same opinions as me, exactly. So I know it's possible, but I guess...
I'm not saying that as a dig, but
it's difficult.
Yeah.
Like, my upbringing would be very, very different had I had the opportunity to go to a public school. It wouldn't have just been like, I have enough money. I may have lived in a different country. I may have had I may not have been from a single parent household. There's tons of factors that go into just being able to go to a public school. It's not just the money. There's so many different socio-economic factors. I wouldn't have the same friends that I currently have if I went to a private school. I don't know, it's difficult to say. I'd hope I had the same views. I know that there are some private scholars who do have the same views, so it isn't like just a private school itself. But me personally, I can't say.
It's always interesting because some questions I feel like they're unanimous. When, I don't know, if there were to be an attack on the United Kingdom's territory, I think that regardless of all of the factors that divide people, the majority would say, yeah, we should defend ourselves. But then there's these things which just seem like they're eternal issues. And sometimes I was, several years ago, I was speaking to a graduate student in Russia. He was an exchange student from South Korea, and he was doing a master's in nuclear disarmament. And I asked him, so based on what you've studied, do you think that there'll be a multilateral agreement between China and the US in the same way that Russia and the US back in the day still, I think, had all of these agreements that we'll get rid of this many nukes if you get rid of this many nukes. We'll close these down. And then he said, and I asked, why are you studying this? And he said, well, because I'm from Korea, and so South Korea, and every day, we live in fear that North Korea is going to drop a nuke on us. And then he sort of sighed and he said, honestly, Rick, I feel like it won't happen until things almost go bad or until it almost happens. Because a lot of times in politics, you see this crisis thinking that what really gets people to the polling station is not when there's a slow trickle, but the Cuban Missile Crisis, for instance, when the thought process is it can't keep going on like this. And I think that very often, because there's a few people, for instance, who might come from a very fortunate background in terms of a high wealth background, but that have political opinions genuinely, not just to fit in, but genuinely, that would align with a more liberal outlook, and vice versa. And those people are always interesting because you think, it seems almost more genuine because you would assume that it would be easier for them to fall into the thing that's advantageous to them specifically. But they're coming at this from a more sort of, let's say, rationalistic, that I'm not saying this just because it affects me, but because I think it's actually true. That if you sort of go through the maths of it, so to speak, that it would be better for everyone or for the majority. And I think that the group of people who really think like that, they need a crisis to push them, which is a problem. Because, for instance, the coal industry that pushes again, these are statistics where I don't know the citation off the top of my head, so this is probably completely correct information. But the pollution that comes from coal plants every year kills more people through lung disease than all nuclear accidents have killed in total. Every year, coal kills more people. And I don't say that to go into a hot take about like nuclear energy, but that people don't do so much about it. Firstly, because coal is more prevalent, but secondly, because it's slow. Because it takes 20 years or 10 years for the coal to give you those issues. Whereas radiation is like, it's immediate. Everybody has these vivid images. So I think part of the reason that there's a deadlock on these things, like landlords or private schools or so on, these things have been debated for hundreds of years because there's no crisis.
Short-term problems gain much more media attention than long-term problems, just on the whole, because it's this kind of, we'll deal with that when the time comes.
Precisely. There's always this notion that there's something that if we don't think about it right now, we're all going to go up in flames. But then often, like you said, I completely agree that many of these things, if we sat down and so many more people actually sort of treated it in the same way. Let's pretend that if this isn't solved tomorrow, the United Kingdom sinks, we would find solutions very quickly.
Exactly. But I think one exception to that whole long-term versus short thing is the gun problem in America. Because earlier today, I just heard that there was the most terrible mass shooting in Texas. Literally just as of this morning. And
the OxPod's gone grim and political today. Let's go.
It's terrible. It's absolutely awful. And I think guns should just be banned on the spot. Because there's this new Florida law that's being passed where it's like people are now allowed to carry guns without a permit or something.
But should we ban drugs for the same reason? Because I feel like often the argument is there's two things here, that banning drugs doesn't work. Like we tried banning weed, we tried banning alcohol, LSD, so on, and it just makes the problem worse. But then why would guns be different? If we ban them, why don't people just use them?
Sticking with the gun problem.
I'm making this hard for you. I'm not going to give you an easy out.
Yeah. Sticking to the gun problem first. That is both a long-term and a short-term problem. The incident that happened today took an hour. That's short-term. And 8 people were killed, 7 people were injured, including a 5-year-old. It's disgusting. And that happened today. That's a short-term effect of a long-term problem. That short-term effect gets media attention. And people are saying, we need to ban guns, we need to ban guns. It's just not happening on the scale it should be. But it's difficult to look at the gun situation because it's like people are dying because of, coal plants and firstly explosions in the factories, but also actually lung cancer, etc. And it's almost in the same way, but it's like the gun problem, it's a short-term thing that's happening and it has a long-term effect. But these individual shootings are technically individual short-term events. And they're still not being dealt with in the same way. They're getting more media attention, but it's still not being dealt with.
That's a good point. That it feels, but I think, but maybe because it doesn't hit the. Let me say, and then you tell me if I got this right. It's very sort of high. Well, I mean, it's a lethal outcome for people. It's a question of life and death.
Yeah.
But at the same time, things aren't being done about it in the same way that a nuclear crisis would. And I guess I would add to that and say that maybe because people at home don't feel like it's them. It could be them, but it isn't them. Whereas if you feel like tomorrow the Soviet Union's going to drop a bomb on you, suddenly your opinion changes. But when it's a school over there, people are like, oh, but that's not me.
Okay, maybe in the sense of kind of we know nuclear weapons exist, or we know there's a coal plant here, but it's not currently affecting me. And maybe in America it's more like, okay, guns are legal, but I don't necessarily know that there's a shooting nearby me right now. I don't know what it is. It's like mass shootings are a part of a long-term problem, but individually they're kind of short events, if that makes sense.
It's a tough one because Switzerland, for instance, they don't have them. So then what's going? It's why is it like that?
Like you said, if we thought the UK was going to sink tomorrow, we'd be acting on it right now. But America is literally showing that people are being shot right now, and they're still not acting on it. So sure, in the case of the UK sinking, maybe we would do something, but there's a kind of direct example of that happening in America, and nothing is being done, and it's happening right now. And so I think that maybe short-term events like individual gun shooting, sure they're getting more media attention, but still nothing's being done about them. People are reacting more strongly to them, but nothing's actually happening as a result. So sure, maybe people would react very strongly to the UK thinking. I know I would, but me myself, I'm not gonna be able to lift the UK up out of the water.
This is true. Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's nothing I can do about it. And to be honest, I don't actually know how quickly the government would react. Would they evacuate the entire country overnight? Probably not.
Well, they have 3 little boats for people who are in the connection. And the rest are listen, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just take swimming lessons. We've got a free 30-minute video on YouTube by the NHS. Doesn't always load, but when it does load, it sometimes helps.
This is how to swim, and you get the national emergency alert. By the way, the UK sinking, and everyone's phones start vibrating, and you're like, wow, long-term problem. Probably won't deal with it right now.
I think this would be something that's always should be talked about, and people should think about it, and also show up for the voting booth on the day, and care about it, because it's always going to be rough. But as long as we talk about it, there's a greater likelihood. I say this as someone, in the Russian Federation, there's many things, and I don't want to go on hot takes, but sometimes people just give up on this, and they don't say these things because they're like, it won't happen. But and here you're doing the exact opposite. You're doing both things. In the first instance, you're doing something about it at the scale that you can. And like you said, you can't scale it all the way up, but what you can do, you do. And at the same time, you're laying out your reasoning and saying, you're entitled to believe what you want to believe, but if you consider this, this, and this, then would it not follow that this is the conclusion that you might draw? And if you agree with the premises, which you may or may not, but if you agree with the premises, wouldn't this follow? So you're coming at it from both ends. And I think that's, that is something to celebrate, because in many countries we forget that's not the case at all, where people don't do the thing on their end of it, either because they just don't have the resources or because they just feel so demoralized. And in the second instance, they don't talk about the government because they're afraid that something might happen to them, or they're not afraid for themselves, but they feel like even if they did show up to protest, the government will be like, cool, and then just go on their agenda. And maybe part of the reason is the UK, but I'm not in a position to say, for a lot of reasons, but I think sometimes we don't have to conclude with the point of like things are better than we think or things are worse than they think. But at the very least, it's nice that those two things exist. And also, I think that's it for today. But we're just getting started, so you need to come back on.
Yeah,
we need to discuss this.
I'm going to do like my bullet points. Right, here are all of the different laws we're going to go through. We're going to break all of the hot topics, and I'm just going to protest everything.
Absolutely, as you should, and I'll be here to make it hard for you. I'm gonna be here, steel manning, and regretting it dearly. No, phenomenal. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been amazing. It's been really, really good. And thank you to all those tuning in at home, on your phone, on the bus, home alone. Producer giving me the cringe look. Come on, it's a good outro. Anyway, thank you guys so much. It's been amazing. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Powerful
Powerful stuff.
stuff. Sweet, that's a wrap.